And hi everyone, welcome to eLearnChat, where talk is knowledge. And I don't know if you know this, but we are a show with a lot of appeal. Right next to me, right there, she is Lesley Price, who has appeal, a lot of learn appeal. In fact, you can find out more about what she's doing at www.learnappeal.com. Hi, Lesley.
Hi, Rick. It's lovely to see you guys again after the summer break.
I know, it's been too long.
Yeah.
Been way too long.
I've been busy.
You had a birthday in between and everything.
I had a birthday, and now it's total garden revamp.
Yeah, that'll be fun. Hey, we've got with us today Bryan Jones from eLearningArt.com. Let's get started. And we are back, and there he is. So, Bryan, how have you been?
Thanks for having me, guys. Doing really well. Yeah, thanks for having me back. It's good to be here.
I always have to ask you, where are you in the world right now?
I am in Truckee, California, so still up in the Lake Tahoe area.
Okay.
And we are now staying. Yeah, it's beautiful up here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we weren't sure if we were going to make it another year through the winters, but we have now committed. We're staying another year, and then we're going to reevaluate. So I love both the winter and the summer, but my wife doesn't like the cold quite so much. Our first winter that we were up here is the most snow in recorded history. So we had like 15-foot snow cave in our driveway, and it was a really, really tough. We moved from Santa Monica, so all different weather, like 72 and sunny every day, to like a crazy amount of snow.
Wow, good timing. That was good timing. Good marketing on your part, right?
That was terrible. And we had our son was only 5 months old at the time.
Oh gosh.
And our older daughter was only 2. So it was just a total madness, and moving into a crazy environment.
Wow. Hey, we're going to have something in the show notes about this, but Bryan was very generous. He put a link. It's called www.elearningart.com/relate, RELATE. And there you can get a whole mess of good graphics and images and everything else. So he'll have that up. That's going to be up already or this weekend?
That's already up. It's just it's a question of if you want to customize it. It's in there. It's 100 images and I think a few templates as well. But if there are certain characters or the stuff that you have found the most useful, we can include those sorts of poses. Or if you go in there and you like what's there, we can keep it how it is. But hopefully that'll help people get started building.
That's a free gift from Bryan to all of you. So take a look at it, download, and he's got great stuff. So enjoy. We'll have notes in the we'll have links in the show notes below. And what have you been up to with?
That was actually something I was going to be asking you, Bryan, because technically retired. It's a bit of a sounding joke, but I'm technically semi-retired, and I work for this charity called Learn Appeal. And what we're doing is we're taking e-learning to places where they don't even have any internet. And one of the things, and we want to make all the content, we're creating content that you can put on a box, on a capsule that doesn't connect to the internet. And one of the things, we want to make it contextually relevant, and we want to make it fun, we want to make it engaging. And so one of the things I was going to ask you about was images and the importance of images being contextually relevant.
Oh, sure. Yeah, and actually, I think it's funny, at the start of eLearningArt was on some of that as well. If you went on to stock photo sites, everyone that you'd find it would be like, oh, the construction worker, and it was like, oh, this super buff guy wearing some ridiculous outfit, or super hot janitor, or just like things that weren't relevant. So and they were all in suits too. So it was going back and shooting like normal looking people in outfits that people actually wear in a work environment. And I imagine that's probably harder for you finding images that are in the right, like a lot of my stuff is more corporate images versus out in the field. I don't know exactly what types of images you're looking for, but to have people that look like the people that you are teaching, that they're wearing the same clothing, same hairstyles, same everything.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be exactly the same, but to be honest, if you're going to plant a tree in Africa, you don't have to wear a hard hat, a high-vis jacket, eye goggles, a face mask, gloves, and steel toe-cap boots.
You're saying you don't have to wear anything?
I don't even think they do that in the US.
Oh, they do, actually. We have a lot of OSHA rules and regulations, occupational safety and hazard rules. So, yeah, and we have lawyers who have nothing better to do than to sue. So we get a lot of that here. I think you have to, otherwise they come after you. But in Africa, no, you're right. They probably don't have to worry too much about that.
But no matter where you are, I've always said, and I was looking back on conversations we'd had in the past, Ryan, and I actually found one you were giving. You asked people on Twitter for top tips, and one of the things that I mentioned was, and you've got me down on your list as saying, it's find the with him for people, so find the what's in it for me, and make sure it's contextually relevant to me. And I think that is equally applicable nowadays in learning as we know it, in learning and development as we know it.
Oh, for sure. The more that you can make it about what people are doing and helping them do their job better, the better the training is. So not so much focused on a course, but for providing the tools they need, the information they need to do their job. And I always tend to default to scenario-based learning. That's what I started doing when I started in, I guess it was 18 years ago, was building e-learning scenarios where you're focusing on first, like, what is it that a person is doing, and then how do you get them to practice what it is that you want them to do compared to what they're doing now. And that's not the only way that you can teach people to do stuff, but that's definitely, I think, more of the focus than just like creating a click-through course with a bunch of information.
But then, you even mentioned the word scenario. How many people understand that as compared to, I'm telling a story? It's about storytelling. And all of us, from when we were very little children, were learned by stories. Definitely.
And that's one of my, I'd say, scenarios and stories, they have a lot of overlap. But stories is the other major way that I like to teach, and that's how we've all learned since we were kids, and since the beginning of mankind.
Now, you know what one of the problems is, if you think about it, a lot of people in the training world don't really know how to write scenarios and stories, and that's been part of the issue with how do you convey a story if you're not a natural storyteller. And you can train people to write better, but it's something that a lot of people have a hard time with. I would say a lot of people in the e-learning world tend to be more like tech writers. They give you the facts, they give you the information. Not that many are that creative in terms of calling out stuff. Calling out is really tricky for a lot of people. We get scripts from lots of different instructional designers throughout the years, and calling out is a tough one. Sometimes we just tell people don't call out anymore. Don't worry about it. We'll deal with the call outs. It's not what they're used to. And I used to, for years, I've been preaching, if you're an instructional designer, go take a class in creative screenwriting, because it'll get you more into the story mode, at least thinking differently about how you present, how you create interactions, how the interactions come out naturally from a scenario or from an interaction between two people or three people or 10, whatever it might be. Well, what do you think of that, Bryan?
That's interesting. I was just looking around my desk, and I know that I have it somewhere here, but I have too much junk on my desk. I have a whole bunch of books on storytelling and storytelling techniques. Mm-hmm. I think storytelling and writing a good story is something that takes some training and some practice. And I think that's actually where scenarios, it's an easier thing. Like if you're thinking about go talk to a subject matter expert and talk to people who are real, we can call them learners, people that are doing whatever it is you want them to do, and what are the conversations that they're having, and what are the problems that they're having, and how can you write in the same tone that they have, and then create decision points around where there are several realistic options that they can choose from, and then leads to real consequences, but all in the way that people would talk. Like I read time where people aren't using any contractions, like, no, you cannot do this. It feels robotic, instead of, how would you say this? How would you explain this to a friend? And I think one of the beautiful things with scenarios is that all you're doing is mimicking real life and writing in the way that people talk to each other. I think Cami Bean says, like, talk to people like they're a real human interacting with another real human. And it actually becomes something that's easier to write. But yes, trying to turn that then into a story is a more challenging thing.
Yeah.
With your scenarios, one of the things I also think is incredibly useful is the branching scenarios, where people can make judgments, people can make choices, and okay, maybe you can put gamification into it, but it's also okay to make a wrong choice, because then you learn from your mistakes.
Right.
Absolutely.
But it's funny, a lot of corporations are afraid to make things that have a possibly negative connotation, like, for example, making a mistake. And they're missing out on a very important part of learning. We learn by mistakes. And they just have this fear of, we're going to get sued, or somebody's going to complain, or this or that. You can't manage by fear. And if you train by avoiding things that are very good training things, you're not going to learn. It's just something that we see enough out there that they're afraid to take that risk. But life is a risk, and everything we do, like from little on.
Right. What about in your scenarios? What about in your scenarios? Do you do branching scenarios so people can actually learn from, people make calls, judgment calls, and maybe learn from not quite doing the right thing? I'm not saying doing the absolute wrong thing, but maybe they could have made better decisions.
No, absolutely. That's the power of a scenario, is allowing people to make choices and having choices in there that are likely to also be wrong, that they're close enough to what's right where you're catching the nuance. If it's just a scenario or a quiz or whatever where it's completely clear what the answer is going to be, it's one clearly right answer and then three that are clearly wrong, there was no learning, there was no choice. You haven't created any challenge for anybody. And branching is one way to do it, but there's also ways to give feedback in scenarios immediately after through false branching, right? So you might have a course that's linear, going from A to B. They're not branching all over the place. They're going to get to the same point regardless, but when they answer something wrong, they're then getting a piece of feedback, and then they're moving on with the right answer. Yeah. And that's fine. So you actually haven't branched anywhere, but you've created opportunities for choice, for mistakes. And I personally like giving custom feedback based on each response. Mm-hmm. But there's simple models to follow. The problem, gosh, when I think back to the early scenarios I was creating, there was so much if-then logic. They were awesome, but every time you published a new version of it, the testing might take 10 hours. If you do something with false branching, it's super simple. So there's ways to insert decision points and get feedback through a false branching. Actually, I was just working on something for customer service, taking a real live call, and it's a simple model. I call it call interrupt. So you're actually listening to what the call was on the phone between an agent and a customer, and there's basically 4 different opportunities. And this is totally false branching. The call is the call. It was a real call. You didn't go and re-record anything. But you say, you can give feedback based on what the agent just said. Like, what do you think about what Rick just said? Or what do you think Rick should say next? Or what do you predict the customer will say now? So there's opportunities there to just take a pause and to think about things, and to give them multiple options for what they could choose, and then they get to hear what the actual live call then did. And that's something that it's nice. You're dealing with assets that you already have, right? You're just taking a live call. This call was recorded for quality assurance or training. That's the training purpose. That's great. You already have that asset.
Oh, yeah. In Scotland, I'm originally from, you can probably hear from the accent, Brian, I'm originally from Scotland. And in Scotland, when we were children, whereas in English, if you did something wrong as a child, they would say, that'll teach you, so if you, touch something that was, or you cut yourself or whatever, in England, they would say, that'll teach you. In Scotland, the terminology is, that'll learn you.
That'll learn you.
That's how you learn. And it was only when I eventually ended up working in learning and development, I thought, wow, what a good phrase. That'll learn you.
Yeah, and I guess that's more of the point, right? It's not about the teaching, it's about the learning, or hopefully, in our case, the learning then being some improved performance or different outcome than there was before the teaching happened.
Yeah.
Bryan, any trends you're seeing right now in the e-learning or just training arena on the whole?
Well, I feel like Lesley's going to beat me up for talking about trends. She's always gives me a hard time about pitching the trends. No, I think I'm having some fun. Every year I put out that trends, the e-learning trends post, and I'll do it again come January. But what I've been having fun doing is walking through each one of those and building out a practical that can be done in an hour. So, and talking to somebody who's an expert in the space. So I talked to micro learning was one of the big ones, and I talked to Ray Jimenez, and he gave some really good advice on ways to create small training that is practical, and it's about talking to people and figuring out what can help them and how do you put that out there. And I think I did about 10 of these interviews, and they're all lessons, or how to use video. So it could be explainer videos, or it could be interviews like what we're doing right now, but practical steps to actually go out there and do that. I think one of the things that bothers me with trends is, so what, right? So this is a trend. What are you going to do with that? But I like looking at what the trends are, and then I like actually dipping my toes in and trying something out.
Yeah.
No, I don't have any problem with that. I think that it's up to all of us to look and see what's going on out there, because if we don't look and see what the new trends are, how will we learn to the good things that, that are potentially out there, compared to otherwise we would just be doing the same old all the time. So I've got absolutely no problem. What I do have a problem with is that people who just get on the piggyback of trends and go with each new thing without actually checking out if it works.
Yep, I agree with that. The other thing I've been having some fun with.
I'm going to go back. I'm going to go back to the name of your company, Brian. Sorry. So why eLearningArt?
Well, I think that's originally my own. It was my own struggle. I had just gotten out of graduate school. I was picking up some client work, getting back into the e-learning space, and I was trying to build some scenario-based training, trying to build up a mock-up for a client, and I spent, I think it was like 8 or 10 hours looking at some of the traditional stock photo sites, and there weren't the images for telling stories and building scenarios. And it was a total struggle, and I went into the next day to the meeting, and I was embarrassed by what I was showing. And so the goal, I initially was trying to solve my own problem, which was the image assets that would help somebody like me who to build training. So it's the name art it's really about like the visual assets that were needed to be able to build training, and the traditional stock photo sites aren't set up for that. They're not set up for, like, good luck trying to find not hundreds of images of the same two people together. Try to find like 2 images of the same people together. It just doesn't work. Yeah, so there's some frameworks that I work with. Obviously, those character cutouts make up a huge portion of my library because ultimately training is about people and people doing things. And when I look at something like, some of the big stock photo sites will say, oh, we have 20 million images, we have 50 million images. That sounds terrible to me, because it's like 50 million images to sort through that I know aren't going to be useful for building corporate training. And one of the interesting things, I had one of my math nerd friends do some math on me. Like, when you break all the individual assets apart, so you have the Lesley character and the Bryan character and the Rick character, you take different backgrounds, you mix and match the different poses. I think there's something, he did this for me maybe 5 years ago, and at the time, the number of 2-character scenes that you could build was, I think, 4 billion. So just the power of combination. When you break things apart, you actually have more flexibility. So instead of, let me start with 50 million images and try to filter it down to what I need, you say, here are the 3 characters that I want. Now I need to find the poses that I want that are going to make these things up so that I can then tell the story. So it's finding frameworks like that actually work better for people who are building corporate training. If you're looking for a great marketing photo, the traditional stocks photo sites are great for that. If you're trying to tell a story, that's not the spot to be.
Yep, that's true.
Well, that makes total sense.
And it's interesting. I've been doing, one of the things I've been working on recently that I'm having a lot of fun with is I've been teaching a portfolio class, so helping people build out their e-learning portfolios. And I've run through a couple of different cohorts with that, and that's been something I've really been enjoying doing, and thinking through what the right process is, and doing something that's impactful in people's careers. And I think that the e-learning portfolio is something that everybody talks about doing for years and never gets around to. And there's a lot of hangups that people have because they don't have the rights to use certain things. They don't know where to get started on the tech front. But there's some stuff that makes that, once you have some frameworks around that it's actually much easier to do. And I've been really enjoying.
And Bryan, it's also amazing at what little effort people put into creating nice looking e-learning. There's a lot of beautiful pieces, but there's a lot of pieces that are really ratty. They look like really bad PowerPoints. And what a difference it makes when you have the right art, when you have the right backgrounds, when you have color, texture, emotion in it. It's night and day. And yet a lot of people think that's beyond them, but it isn't. That's what these tools are for.
Yeah, and I think part of the problem is that most people who are in the e-learning profession, instructional design, whatever you want to call it, are accidental instructional designers. So most people don't have a degree in instructional design. They don't have a graphic design background or formal training. So you come into this where you are maybe a subject matter expert or working in some HR type role, where now all of a sudden you're expected to be a good visual designer. So I think that's one big problem with it. And the other is that people are often set up to fail, right? It's like, oh, you're an expert. Here's a tool. Go build something amazing. But yeah, your asset or your graphics budget is $0. Mm-hmm. Good luck putting something together, and you're just kind of stuck. So that
I used to know a guy years ago. He would always say, "I'm a real big picture kind of guy," and I'd always say, "Yeah, but you got a little screen." So anyway.
But it's interesting. It's interesting what you're saying, Bryan, because one of the things that, to give another plug to Learn Appeal, one of the things that we encourage at Learn Appeal, and we don't think there's actually enough of it, is people within our own community don't seem to nurture and want to grow young talent. So I was in a Twitter conversation earlier on today where somebody had put up saying, how many young people do you know who ever say, I want to be, you know, a learning technologist. I want to be an instructional designer. I want to be in e-learning. And I mean, I did something at a community high school recently to encourage young people to get involved. We did a, you know, career workshops. And most of the young people, you know, they were about 15, 16, and we had about 100 of them altogether. And I would say 99.9% of them thought you needed an IT degree to be involved in our industry. Now that to me is scary.
Definitely. I mean, I don't think there's anybody. You probably couldn't name a single person that when you're talking to a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old that's going to say, I want to be an e-learning developer or I want to be an instructional designer. It's just not. Maybe they say they want to be a teacher, but there's not. There's definitely not awareness in our industry of what that even is. And forget about kids. I mean, if I tell somebody I'm an e-learning developer, they don't know what I'm talking about. Right? Like adults.
Right.
So what do you do? And actually the most common thing, I ran into this yesterday when I was telling somebody, I have images and templates that help instructional designers and e-learning professionals build better corporate training. The first thing he went to was like, so like compliance training. Like, oh gosh, no, that's what you're thinking about. That's the worst of it. Like compliance training is the worst training. It's more about covering themselves legally.
Checkoffs.
Yep, checking the box. And not trying to improve performance. So, and this guy was telling me about, but it's not that big of a deal, except the last couple of years that they've introduced new training where he can't click the next button until he's been looking at the slide for 15 seconds, and that's driving him crazy. It's like, oh gosh, yes, this is of course a terrible experience for you. You were just having to check the box, and they're forcing you to stick around, because before he used to just next as fast as he could, get to the quiz, take the quiz, do my best to pass it. I didn't pass it. Oh great, next, take it again.
Those are the good old days.
I mean, unfortunately, that's the perception that most people have of what, if they work in a corporate environment, is that e-learning is compliance training, and that's unfortunate. We're starting off on the wrong foot with that as the first experience that people have had.
Well, you know, the problem is they keep saying it's adult learning, but it's really adult learning, DOLT.
Well, you'd be very pleased to hear, Bryan. When we did these workshops with the young people, the 15, 16-year-olds, we said to them, okay, we're going to create an outline course. What should the course be about? And the two that I remember, the one in particular was, how do you teach your grandmother how to use Snapchat? And the other one was in the middle of the world, and they said, how do you manage a good football team? Which
Interesting.
Which is not what you would normally expect. But that actually gives me hope when I think we were talking to these young people, and they who knew nothing about e-learning, the two topics that they chose were nothing to do with compliance.
Right.
They were all about behaviors.
And I think there's an interesting point there too with what approach, or maybe not even a course approach, what a training approach might be for learning Snap. It's the she's missing from grandkids if she's not able to use it. What's in it for her? It's being able to experience stories in a way that she couldn't, instead of jumping right into the technical aspects of using that. It's really, what's the benefit? Why does she to use Snapchat?
Yeah, and because they were thinking, oh, it'll help me to be able to talk to my grandmother, to my granny, when she's however many miles away. And that was what they were thinking about. How do I teach my granny how to use Snapchat?
That's good. I like the idea of how do I manage a football team with Snapchat?
We didn't get that far.
That's the advanced course. Hey guys, we are out of time. It goes fast. It goes way too fast. Bryan, will you come back soon?
Yeah, anytime. Great chatting with you.
Because we barely chatted today. But we have another show coming after this one, so we had to cut it at about 35 minutes. So that's not too bad. But anyway, yeah, let's see you again real soon. And Lesley, as always, I'm going to call you Miss Appeal from now on. I like
he calls me the M Appeal of learning.
She is the M Appeal, but you're also Miss Appeal.
Miss Appeal.
Miss Appeal. Learn Appeal.
Well, Rick, have me back on. I have you were asking me before about before the call about some of those surveys that I do, the expert roundup posts. Yes. I have one on scenarios actually, which we talked about today. It hasn't been released yet, but they should be out in the next couple of weeks. So
good. We'll get you on. We'll get you on after that.
Yeah,
that'll be great. It's always fun to talk about, and the results are usually pretty interesting.
Yeah, this one's more like the it's more number one tip. So not so much survey stats,
okay.
but it'll be there's some really awesome ones that from some of the scenario gurus in our space. So I'm really excited about what the response was.
That sounds great.
I think that type of learning, honestly, I think it is absolutely critical. I really do. Even in compliance. Even in compliance.
Well, that's
yeah.
I know you guys have to run, but that is the best way to run compliance if it's going to be dull, is capturing the nuance and where mistakes are actually happening.
Right.
Because there are compliance violations, and being able to tell that story and have a scenario where people are making choices that actually could lead to potentially that nuanced mistake. And that's a much more interesting way than click, 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 take the quiz.
Yep.
Much more powerful.
That's true.
Yep.
Anyway, hey, for everybody in the chat, was anybody in the chat room?
I didn't get any questions from
Not today. No questions today. They would be befuddled by this whole conversation. Anyway, we will see you guys next time, and have a great weekend. And if you're somewhere on our East Coast, stay dry. It looks like there's going to be a lot of rain falling in parts. Anyway, have a good one. Lesley, you have a great weekend. Enjoy all that construction going on.
Yeah, I will. Thank you.
It'll be done soon. Bryan, good to see you back stateside and actually here for a while.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, take care. Thanks a lot. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.